Today at 6, the Albanian drug gangs using the migrant camps in France to lure workers over to Britain. There's been a sharp rise in the number of Albanians crossing the channel in small boats this year. We report from Albania on what's behind it.
Locals in this neighbourhood say 70% of the community has already left, and many of those living here now are thinking of joining them.
Also on the programme tonight, train strikes starting tomorrow are called off by the RMT union, though Saturday's services will still be disrupted because of the late decision. Discounts on energy bills for households that use less power during peak times under plans to avoid blackouts. And a major shift in money for the arts. The English National Opera looks set to move out of London as Blackpool Illuminations wins funding for the first time.
On BBC London, the growing numbers of child trafficking victims disappearing from care in the capital, some because they're lured into modern slavery. We have a special report.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. A BBC investigation has found that Albanian drug gangs are offering to pay for migrants to cross the English Channel if they're prepared to work in the UK drugs industry when they arrive. Gangs are using the migrant camps of northern France as a recruitment ground. There's been a sharp rise in the number of Albanians crossing the Channel in small boats this year. They now account for around a third of the almost 40,000 people who have landed on England's beaches in 2022. Lucy Williamson reports.
For each boat, each migrant, there can be many smugglers. Albanian fixers, UK guarantors, Kurdish criminal gangs. The journey starts in towns like Lagnas, now marked by absence. The shuttered houses and empty streets, signs of an exodus this year. Most were drawn by UK wages, 10 times higher than here. And each departure makes business in Lagnas even harder. As the price of crossing to the UK has dropped, the suburbs around Tirana are being drained of people. Locals in this neighbourhood say 70% of the community has already left, and many of those living here now are thinking of joining them. There are many places like Lagnas in Albania now. Majlinda's son crossed to the UK from Dunkirk last month.
He was a seasonal worker, working for 4 months of the year for a minimal salary in a kitchen. He had more expectations for himself, so he went to find something better. But it comes with sacrifices. We're in debt to pay back the money we borrowed.
She says a lot of people from the area have gone, families as well as men. Her youngest son, just 14 years old, is already planning his trip. Adverts on Albanian social media promise passage for around £3,000 from Brussels, Paris or Dunkirk. They often work closely with Iraqi Kurdish gangs who control most small boat crossings from France. Posing as an Albanian migrant, we contacted some. Within half an hour we had 2 offers for crossings. It's easy, we're told. Only those who didn't claim asylum were sent back, one says. The others didn't have any problems. The price of crossing to the UK by small boat is less than half the price of being smuggled by lorry. And there are other options for those who can't pay.
There is a criminal drugs market within the UK, that's no secret. We have seen cases of trafficking, and we've seen cases where people are what we call debt bonded. They come here to work off the cost of their journey to the UK, and they are victims of trafficking. And we look at modern slavery, human trafficking very seriously.
One Albanian man who paid for a place on a Kurdish boat this summer says he was approached by recruiters for the UK drugs trade in a Dunkirk migrant camp.
They offered me lots of things to pay for the journey, to give me a job, but I wasn't interested. They asked me 4 or 5 times.
Driven by the promise of prosperity, each successful crossing is an advert, an inspiration, an invisible thread that tugs at the minds of Albanians back home. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Dunkirk.
Our home editor, Mark Easton, is here, and you've been looking at the figures behind the sudden rise in Albanian migrants. What have you found?
Well, Sophie, the impact of those Albanian trafficking gangs can be seen in the people who arrive in Kent, having set out across the channel in small boats. And 2 years ago, just 50 arrivals were Albanians. Last year, it was 800. This year, it's already over 12,000. And according to the Home Office, of those, 10,000 were single adult men. So who are they? And why have they come? Well, some, as Lucy was saying, are undoubtedly economic migrants. Figures from 2018 help explain why. Average hourly pay in Albania was then around £1.50. Here in the UK, it was about £13.35. That's 9 times higher. People will often come over here, perhaps for a couple of years, many operating in the shadow economy. And Albanians now represent the largest foreign nationality in prisons in England and Wales, 1,300 people locked up. But the situation's complicated because some of those Albanians who arrive in the UK are genuine victims. Just over half of Albanian asylum seekers are granted asylum by the Home Office. But among men, just 14% are granted asylum, while among women and children, it's 90%. In just 3 months this summer, 1,100 Albanians, including 200 children, were identified as potential victims of modern-day slavery. So Albania may be a safe country, but the UK authorities accept that a significant proportion of those who arrive here may have legitimate fears for their personal safety.
Mark, thank you. A series of train strikes due to start tomorrow have been suspended by the RMT union. The walkouts on the 5th, 7th and 9th of November would have brought the rail network to a virtual halt. But now union leaders and network rail bosses have agreed to resume talks. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin is at London's Euston Station. So first of all, tomorrow, what does this now mean? Will trains run?
Well, it means the strikes by members of the RMT tomorrow, Monday and Wednesday are off. The union says it'll now enter into a period of intense negotiations with the employers, that's Network Rail and the train companies involved in this dispute. But crucially, the announcement has come too late to prevent severe disruption still going ahead across the rail network tomorrow. Basically, it's too late to change those timetables now. The same is probably true of Monday. Hopefully things will be back to normal on Wednesday, but people are being told to check before they travel over the coming days.
Talks resume. How likely is it that they can resolve this dispute?
Well, I think what we've had announced today is a significant moment. Actually, the TSSA union had already called off some action by its members in Network Rail, but the RMT's move is something of a surprise. It says it has secured a commitment from the train companies that they will make an offer, which they haven't done yet, and that Network Rail will take part in unconditional talks. I have to say, speaking to sources in the rail industry, they say their position hasn't actually changed, but they do welcome the RMT's announcement and say they are committed to continuing those negotiations.
Katie Austin, thank you. The English National Opera is moving its headquarters out of London and losing a major part of its funding as part of government plans to shift more money for the arts out of the capital. The Royal Opera House, the National Theatre and the Donmar Warehouse Theatre will also lose funding from Arts Council England. Instead, money will be given to theatres in Coventry and on Merseyside, and libraries in Yorkshire and Warwickshire will get money for the first time. With the details of a major shake-up, here's our arts correspondent, David Silito.
Blackpool's famous illuminations have been admired by millions over the last 140 years or so. But here's a question. Is it art? The Arts Council is certainly convinced it's going to be giving the illuminations a grant for the first time.
We're over the moon. We're delighted. I mean, it's really a fantastic accolade from them that we can demonstrate to the world that we're very serious about our collection and our work.
Blackpool is not alone. There are many winners in this funding settlement, especially towns that have had almost nothing before today. But there are also some big losers. Among them, here, English National Opera.
A third of its income comes from the Arts Council, and it's gone. There is a restructuring grant to help them adjust and move, probably to Manchester, but it's still a big cut.
I'm not one of those people who thinks art should only be in London. We're the opera company where 1 in 7 of our audience is under 35. We do free tickets for under 21s, and we welcome in people of colour more than any other opera house. So it's slightly odd to reduce our funding to this extent.
The Mayor of London says the capital is losing around £50 million in arts funding. Instead, the money's being moved to venues such as Shakespeare North in Prescott near St Helens.
It was very evident that there were large parts of the country that had a big appetite and weren't getting the kind of funding that made it possible for them to enjoy great art on their doorstep. So we set out ourselves with the ambition of spending more money outside London.
Money's also being diverted to services such as libraries in Warwickshire, East Yorkshire and Barnsley. And the list of towns receiving new grants reads like a who's who of the government's levelling up agenda. There is politics in this.
It comes down to, I think, fairness. If you live in the North East, the North West, Yorkshire, why shouldn't you be able to access culture? Why shouldn't you, your children be able to learn and get that creativity from a young age and be inspired to potentially go into these types of industries?
And while it's brought a bit of cheer to places like Blackpool, it's not a great deal. The money is spread thinly. A lot of places will still be making cuts. David Soletto, BBC News.
The Foreign Office says a small number of Britons are among about 70 tourists being held hostage on a riverboat cruise in the Amazon region of Peru. A group of indigenous peoples say they've taken the action to try to get government inspectors to their region to assess the damage from an oil spill from a pipeline that happened in September. One British passenger said conditions were starting to deteriorate on board.
We've been held for just over 24 hours. We are starting to run out of food and water. It's very hot here, obviously. We're doing okay-ish, but we are concerned for the pregnant females we have on board, the diabetics, the children, the elderly and the other ill people. So we are starting to get quite desperate.
The social media giant Twitter has begun sudden and sweeping job cuts to save costs. It's reported the company plans to sack more than half its 7,500 staff. It comes days after Twitter was finally taken over by Elon Musk, the world's richest man. Staff have been tweeting about receiving the news of their dismissal. One wrote, "This isn't looking promising. Can't log into emails. So grateful this is happening at 3 a.m. Another said the official and very dehumanising layoff email has been received. For others, it was simply bye, literally everyone. Well, our technology editor, Zoe Kleiman, joins us now. It is brutal, isn't it?
It's been a really tense time to be a Twitter employee. Imagine waking up in the morning to find you can't get into your work laptop at all. You can't get into any of the platforms that you use at work. Then you find out you're going to be told later on whether your job is at risk. You get that email via your personal email account, and it reportedly says, today is your last day. We will pay you until February. You have to abide by the company guidelines, but we don't expect you to do any more work after today. Why is Elon Musk doing this? Well, he's just bought the company last week for £38 billion. He's overspent on it. It was always a bigger offer than the company was worth. Now he's seen the books and he can see it's a firm that's A, not making any money, and B, isn't really growing its users. It's had around 300 million for a very long time. He's got to take action. He's got to do it fast. He's very, very focused on making this company profitable. And he doesn't really seem to mind how painful that process is to get it over the line.
Zoe Kleiman, thank you. The time is coming up to 6:15, our top story this evening. A BBC investigation finds Albanian drug gangs are using the migrant camps in France to lure workers over to Britain. And how the cost of living is affecting non-league football fans.
And on BBC London, campaigners fight to stop a 24-year-old Syrian refugee from being deported to Rwanda. And it's that time of year again, the bonfire night and Diwali celebrations going ahead in London, and those that are cancelled.
King Charles has been hosting a reception at Buckingham Palace ahead of next week's climate change summit in Egypt. The King, who has long campaigned on environmental issues, won't be attending COP27, but the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is now going after changing his mind on attending. Our environment editor Justin Rolat reports from the palace.
The king won't be attending the climate conference in Egypt, so he's done the next best thing and brought the climate discussion to Buckingham Palace. The Prime Minister addressed the meeting.
If we do not act today, we will risk leaving an ever more desperate inheritance for our children tomorrow.
There were decision makers, environmental experts and more than 100 business leaders at the reception. The king believes it is essential the private sector is engaged in the climate challenge. Buckingham Palace insists the king is not disappointed that he won't be going to the conference in Egypt. It says the decision was made after discussions with the then Prime Minister Liz Truss and was, it says, unanimous. But a Downing Street spokesperson hinted yesterday maybe the king would have been jetting off to Egypt had Rishi Sunak been in post at the time. The situation might have been different, she told the BBC.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
Last year's UN climate conference in Glasgow delivered a host of pledges on emissions cuts, finance, net zero, forest protection and more. Egypt says their conference will be about ensuring countries actually deliver on those pledges. Stella McCartney was one of the business leaders at the palace.
Your Majesty, I don't know what to do anymore. The industry that I work in, fashion, is the second most harmful in the world to the planet, and so being part of this conversation and representing my industry is critical. But you know, I think that I'm so hugely passionate about trying to provide a positive solution here.
Stella McCartney won't be at COP27, but the Prime Minister has, of course, changed his mind and will be going, playing his part in the search for positive solutions. He'll be joining more than 100 other world leaders in Egypt next week. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Buckingham Palace.
And you can get more on what the upcoming COP27 climate conference may bring on BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news. You can also get there by using the BBC News app. The total number of people with COVID-19 has dropped across the UK compared to last week, according to the latest figures. Our health editor Hugh Pym is here. Some good news.
Well, that's right, Sophie. There had been predictions of a twin-demic, as it was called, with COVID and flu surges this autumn. But the latest news from the Office for National Statistics is there has been a fall in infections in the UK. So the chart, looking back over recent months, just makes clear that we had, of course, previous peaks back in the spring and the summer. This time it seems to have peaked the spike at around 2 million and has fallen a bit to 1.9 million. Now, in terms of the nations of the UK, let's take a look at the different rates that are reported by the ONS. And for England, the figure was 1 in 35 with the virus in the week ending October the 24th. That was down. It was down in Wales as well at 1 in 40. Scotland with 1 in 35 people with the virus. The trend was uncertain. Northern Ireland a slight increase to 1 in 30. But crucially, hospital admissions have fallen, and that may well be down to the rollout of the boosters and, of course, maybe growing immunity across the population. But with flu, we are seeing higher hospital admissions than we did before the pandemic with the growth of flu there. So there's possible worries ahead. And, of course, no one can rule out another COVID wave, maybe in the new year sometime.
Hugh Pym, thank you. A look now at some other stories making the news today. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has said there will be no elections for the Stormont Assembly before Christmas. Under the law, an election must be called within 12 weeks of the 28 October deadline for power sharing to be restored. Devolved government has not functioned since February, with the Democratic Unionist Party blocking the formation of the ruling executive. Scotland's First Minister has denied that the awarding of a contract to build ferries at Ferguson's shipyard in Port Glasgow was a case of jobs for the boys. Nicola Sturgeon said she refuted the suggestion that the work was improperly given to a businessman with a known relationship with the Scottish Government. The ferries are years late and could be £200 million over budget. Nicola Sturgeon said she deeply regretted the impact on island communities. Football fans travelling to the World Cup could be affected by a strike at Heathrow Airport. The union Unite says about 700 of its members are to walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. The workers are employed in services including baggage handling and cargo. Unite said the action would cause disruption at Terminals 2, 3 and 4. FIFA has written to teams taking part in the Qatar World Cup, urging them to focus on the football and not hand out moral lessons. Several competing nations, including Australia and Denmark, have protested about Qatar's treatment of migrant workers and its ban on same-sex relationships. Discounts on energy bills will be offered to households that use less power during peak times under plans from the National Grid to avoid blackouts. The scheme is going to be tested in England, Scotland and Wales over a number of days between now and March, though only properties with a smart meter will be able to take part. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
It's the time of day when many of us get home, turn the lights on and all sorts of power-hungry appliances as well. But millions of households could now earn money by using less electricity when demand is at its peak. Julie from Saffron Walden is up for it.
I've ditched the kettle and I bought this water dispenser.
She took part in a small trial earlier this year.
You can just sort of say we're going to have dinner at this time. I'm not going to put the washing machine on until this time. You can plan around it, and it's been made part of what I do and what we do in our home now. It's part of our lives.
And you've earned some money?
I've earned a bit of money out of it, yeah.
So how does the National Grid's new demand flexibility scheme work? It's doing at least 12 one-hour tests this winter. They'll take place between 4 and 7 p.m, peak time for energy use, with a day's notice for customers taking part. A typical household could save up to £100 off their bills, but it depends on how much energy you use. And you'll need a smart meter to do it. And most energy suppliers are in the process of signing up.
If we can all do our little bit, we can shift demand out of that peak and help maintain security of supply throughout the winter. It's unprecedented. It's a first of a kind that we're doing this.
So this is an insurance policy?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're trying to ensure that demand for electricity doesn't outstrip supply. The squeeze on gas supplies in Europe, thanks to the war in Ukraine, means things could get difficult. This room will be crucial to everyone this winter. This is the cockpit of our electricity system, where any potential problems are spotted. And it's here that tough decisions will have to be made if there are rolling blackouts. National Grid still think that's unlikely, but will the financial incentive be big enough for this contingency plan to work?
This is potentially a really powerful tool to allow consumers to shift their demand away from the peak periods. What will be interesting after the event will to see whether their busy lives allow them to actually do that and how much of an uptake there is.
The first trial could start as early as next week to help ensure the lights stay on this winter. Emma Simpson, BBC News, Reading.
The Football Supporters Association say they're very concerned after a survey found a quarter of fans at non-league clubs expect to go to fewer matches this winter because of the cost of living crisis. It's another blow to clubs already struggling with rising bills. But despite that, one club is opening its doors to help its local community stay warm, as our sports correspondent Andy Swiss reports.
A November night at non-league Chesterfield and a victory over visitors Gateshead for their fans to cheer. But this is a club now offering far more than just football.
Hi everybody, you all right?
It's opened its doors as a warm hub for the local community, where people like Brenda can come for a hot drink and some welcome respite amid the cost of living crisis.
It means a lot. Come here for company, and food's nice and it keeps me warm in winter.
If we can take a little bit of that pressure away and say, actually, every night, come here, there will be food, there will be heating. I hope that that gives families that little bit of comfort. And fans are proud that their town, their club is opening up to people in a time of unprecedented worry.
But fans are facing their own financial pressures. Finding the money to support their team is more challenging than ever.
It's not just the price of the tickets, it's the price of what you buy inside. So obviously got me coffee here, but the price of that's going up, getting in to come to the match, parking, etc.
I mean, to go to a London game for us, it's £150 for one game.
you know, and that's like 3 weeks shopping for me.
Well, a survey by the Football Supporters Associations found nearly a quarter of non-league fans expect to attend fewer matches this winter because of the cost of living crisis. And when it comes to travelling to away fixtures, nearly half say they'll be cutting back.
Clubs will be very, very concerned to hear that fans are thinking about staying away from games or spending less, because it's going to be a very, very tricky winter for a lot of football clubs if they're going to be losing a significant portion of their matchday income.
And with clubs also facing soaring energy bills, especially for floodlights, the emphasis is simply on survival.
We're looking at every angle we can. Can we turn floodlights off earlier after a match? Can we turn them on later before a game? I know some clubs have looked at kick-off times, and I think we're in the territory at the moment of we don't rule anything out.
Do you fear some clubs might go under?
I think it's a constant threat that some could go under. We'll make sure that we're all right here. One way or another, we'll get through it.
From fans to clubs to communities, though, a challenging winter awaits, of battles on the pitch, but even bigger battles off it. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Chesterfield.
Now, it's hard to believe it now, but there was a time back in the 1970s and 80s when branded trainers and designer clothes weren't easily available in the UK. Back then, football fans in the northwest of England began to pick up these items when they went to the rest of Europe following their team, spawning a football fashion movement now known as the Casuals. A new exhibition opening at the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool charts how casual culture went mainstream, creating the leisure wear industry of modern times. Our culture editor, Katie Razzle, went to have a look.
Merseyside in the 1980s. Dreams of European football success were coming true, and fans were driving a fashion movement still with us today.
Then the first goal for Derek Mountfield.
Derek Mountfield won the league and the European Cup Winners' Cup with Everton.
Iconic clothing from iconic days, things I used to wear, my friends used to wear going to the games.
Derek remembers the so-called casuals who lived for branded clothes and trainers and are being celebrated in the exhibition.
The fans should travel to away games in Europe and come back with all this new gear from various parts of Europe, and it became a bit of a culture in those days that people would go away, not even to watch the football, just to get the clothes and the shoes and everything else and bring them back.
There are casuals behind the Art of the Terraces exhibition. Liverpool supporter Dave Hewitson is one of the co-creators.
1982, I went to watch Aston Villa play in the European Cup final against Bayern Munich in Holland. But the reason we went was so that we could go across the border into Germany to get trainees and bring them back. That sort of started to spread then from Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and developed into like this subculture that we know today that, you know, spread across the country.
The band The Farm later sported a style its lead singer describes as the working class dressing up. He says back in the 80s, Merseyside shopkeepers started to realise there was a market for designer brands.
A lot of the places in Liverpool were shops which were traditional gentlemen's outfitters who were getting this stuff in, and the staff couldn't believe it. Who are all these kids coming in to get this stuff, you know? And it's because it was a lot of it was branded. No one ever expected it to be in a museum when people started wearing that style of clothing.
The exhibition also portrays the predominantly male and at times violent side of the casual movement. But the creator of the Girl Fans fanzine says the 80s casuals set the trends for today's female fans.
You'll see your Adidas, your Nike trainers, but also Chanel and Gucci trainers. So there's a sense that it's still, for some, a place to go, to dress up and to be seen.
The casuals sparked a style revolution, not just for the fans. 40 years on, branded trainers and designer labels are a fashion staple. A movement that began on the football terraces kicked off the sports leisure wear industry as we know it today. Katie Razzle, BBC News, Liverpool.
Time for the weather now with Louise Lear. What a beautiful day. That's about it, isn't it?
Yes, that's about it in a nutshell. Make the most of it, hopefully. It was cold. Temperatures just below -3, but glorious. Clear blue sky and sunshine. This was Newtown Linford in Leicestershire just a few hours ago. And the clear skies were fairly widespread across the country, but you can see what is waiting in the wings. This amazing base cleft swirl of cloud, this deep area of low pressure that's going to arrive through the night tonight. So it will be chilly for a time over the next few hours, but as the cloud and the rain and the wind starts to increase from the west, those temperatures will climb up potentially. But sheltered eastern areas keep those clear skies through the night. So it's still going to be a chilly start, maybe a touch of frost once again in rural areas of the northeast of Scotland. But it's all going to be about the wind and the rain, I'm afraid, tomorrow. Yet more cloud and rain pushing in. The winds strengthening in comparison to today. Not as strong as they have been this week, but nevertheless noticeable. And they will bring outbreaks of rain gradually drifting its way steadily eastwards, allowing it to brighten up in Scotland, northern England, Northern Ireland. Gusts of winds close to 40 miles an hour with the heaviest of that rain. And that means, in terms of the feel of the weather, similar to today, 10 to 14 Celsius, pretty much where it should be for this time of year. But if you've got bonfire night plans, I potentially think if we draw a line, let's say from Hull down to the Bristol Channel, it may well stay cloudy, dull and damp with that frontal system slowly easing away. And it may well return actually through the night, Saturday night into the early hours of Sunday morning, another spell of wet weather. But however you look at it, for the second half of the weekend, it's all about low pressure once again. More showers, blustery winds from time to time. So Sunday is going to be sunny spells, scattered showers. Temperatures again, 12 to 14 degrees. Sophie.
Louise, thank you. And that is it from us. The news continues here on BBC One because it's time now to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Goodbye.